Alright, legends, we are back with another video with your buddy Jay, and this week we are going over cutting a model for Live2D. Initially, when I recorded this footage, I thought that I could just time-lapse it and include it with the rigging video, but as it turns out, time-lapsed cutting doesn't really offer a whole lot if there's no explanation for it. So I decided to make this a separate video where I try to explain the concept of cutting a little bit and what I'm actually doing in the footage. So on screen right now, I'm separating all the line art into separate individual pieces. And again, with cutting for Live2D, you need to have an understanding of which pieces are meant to be individually moving. And so this a general rule of thumb when you're doing a conventional standing up model when it comes to where to cut. So when you're doing a standard model, you have a lot more references to draw from in terms of how you want to cut up your model and how you want to rig it for Live2D. But for my purposes, it's a little bit wackier since I have a sitting pose. So what you see me do might not be as applicable to what you might personally do, but I think conceptually what I'm doing will still carry over to whatever you want to do with your model, except mine is a little bit more strange and unconventional. So there's a couple of different ways to do this. You can cut out all the lines and then paint over it, or you can do it like me, where you draw the lines and then you paint underneath, and then you go back to the lines and you go back to the paint and fill up whatever holes you have. For me, it's a little bit easier to execute patching holes as opposed to painting the entire thing. So for me personally, my brain cannot comprehend how to draw each individual pieces completely. I'm more used to drawing, a model more traditionally. So it was easier for me to go back, cut up pieces, and fill in the colors as opposed to drawing all the hidden colors. What I mean by hidden colors is that in my image, certain objects are in front of each other. For example, my arms right here are in front of my legs. But with Live2D, when the arms move, the leg underneath will be exposed. So you need to fill in those holes. And so a lot of Live2D artists would straight off the bat draw what was being hidden from the get-go. Whereas how I did it, I'm going back and filling in that hole after cutting up my image. So these are the two separate ways of doing it. I think it's probably a better habit to do the first way, where you completely draw the whole thing right from the get-go. But for me, it's a little bit easier for me to come up with my initial concept and image if I drew the whole thing completely first, and then go back and fix whatever holes needs to be patched. And when it comes to cutting for rigging, I decided to go for a fairly simple rigging. So I didn't really separate the parts that much. I kept it simple and basically went for the biggest pieces, right? So I wanted the forearms to move a little bit. I wanted the upper arms to move a little bit, and I wanted the shoulders and the jackets to be able to shift left and right a little bit with a little bit of perspective change to it when I shift the body around. So overall, I didn't add in a whole lot of crazy movement. Primarily, I focused on nailing the head movement and the hair and some of the facial movement, and everywhere else I just kept it everywhere else I just kept it kind of basic. So when it comes to my cutting, you can see that I'm not going into really tiny detail parts, right? I'm not separating out the necklace, I'm not separating out the little zippers and stuff on the jacket, I'm not separating out the little loose pieces of bandage. That level of rigging is a little bit too advanced for me, for my purposes. I can probably do it, but again, for my purposes, I just wanted all the big movements. I didn't care so much for all the tiny little details. And if I really wanted to, I can go back in the future and work on that. So for example, for the face, The face is probably one of the more difficult parts about cutting and filling in the holes. Because as you can see right now, I have to redo the shadow of the hair. Because when you initially draw the shadow, obviously it's going to be underneath the hair, but you didn't completely fill out every single shape that it creates. Because when you start rigging the hair, it will move around the face and your shadow will have to follow the shape of the hair. So you really want to make sure that you get a separate... So you want to make sure that you create the hair shadow separately, independent from the face and independent from the hair. So right now on screen you can see that I'm basically filling in all the colors that were hidden away in the initial painting. Because again, when you do your initial painting, you're going to have a lot of holes that will be exposed once you start cutting pieces out and seeing them move in Live2D. So it's very important that you make sure everything that gets exposed has proper color underneath. And for my purposes, I kept the colors a little bit simpler, the rendering style a little bit simpler when it comes to the pieces that I had to patch out, because most of the time they're going to be hidden away anyways. And when it comes to joints, you want to make sure that when you move the actual joint, that nothing looks off when it actually creates a bend. Because sometimes elbows and other joints can look really awkward if they have dynamic movement. So one tip I have is to go to your transform tool and move the pieces around to emulate what it would look like in Live2D. If you do some sort of free transform or rotation, you are able to replicate what it might look like in Live2D. Because, you know, in transform, you're able to mess with perspective and skew it. So you're able to see how one piece of mesh is able to kind of bend and interact with other pieces. So if you want a little preview, I highly recommend just going into the transform tool and start messing with things to see what it might look like. Another tip I have would be to pay a lot of close attention to your layers, because layers determine which object goes in front of another object, obviously. And in Live2D, that is the lifeblood of what creates a believable motion, is for things to be cohesive and moving without things piercing and clipping into each other. So make double sure that all your layers are in the correct spots. It's probably a good idea to zoom into each individual pieces and layers you have and try to refine and clean up each individual piece, because you never know what might show up in your Live2D once you start rigging it. So you want to make sure that everything looks clean. Try not to leave anything that's a little bit too blotchy or kind of like have corners cut, because it might look very unnatural in the final Live2D movement. Obviously, if your model is generally upper body only, you can cut a lot of corners when it comes to the lower body, because you're not going to see that move very often, and most of the time that's going to be hidden away. So try to focus on things that you will actually see, and don't focus too much on things that are hidden away. So with the face, the cutting is actually probably the most complex when it comes to the face, because when you cut the eyeball, you basically need to separate out the upper eyelash, the lower eyelash, the eye white, the actual iris, the eye shine, the eyebrow, and the eye crease on top of the eye. And you also need to separate out a piece of the skin underneath the eye, so that the layer is on top of the eyeball layer, so that when you actually move the eyeball around, it's hidden underneath the eye skin, underneath the face. So that's what I was talking about when it comes to making sure your layers are correct, because things need to be hidden away properly in order to, you know, create an effect that it looks like a moving anime guy. Okay, and it looks like we are done for now. Next week we'll go over rigging. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.